Okay, good evening. I'm calling to order the meeting for September 10th, 2024. Madam Clerk, will you take roll, please?
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames,
Here.
Councilmember Tanaka, Councilmember Ku.
Here.
You have a quorum.
Thank you so much. Turned off my microphone. Let's start off with public comments on items that are not on the agenda. Do we have any?
We have one request to speak from Lisa M.
Okay, thank you.
It looks like she's left chambers, though.
She's not here?
She's not here.
Oh, okay. Then we have no public comments and we'll move to action items. First one is Office of the City Auditor, presentation of the Technology Applications Disaster Recovery Preparedness Assessment Audit Report. Ms. Murdoch?
Good evening, committee members. Kate Murdoch, City Auditor. The Auditor's Office is presenting the Technology Applications Disaster Preparedness Assessment. This audit looked at the city's current disaster recovery plan for high priority applications. And Brian Nichols will be presenting the audit findings and recommendations.
Great, thank you, Kate. And thank you for allowing us to be here this evening. So Brian Nichols, I'm a partner with Baker Tilly in our risk advisory and cybersecurity practice. My team oversaw the performance of the Technology Applications Disaster Preparedness Assessment. On the next slide, you'll see the overall objectives. The goal of this assessment was to assess the current disaster recovery plan, focused on high priority applications and the supporting infrastructure for the city, to identify adequacy of both documentation and to identify if there's any additional requirements that still needed to be documented. Additionally, looking to assess the current recovery capabilities and develop any recommendations on any findings or gaps identified. To start first with the positives, of course, going through the city has a continuity of operations plan that outlines the roles, responsibilities, and activities of the IT team in case of a disaster. There's also disaster recovery and business continuity process documents and backup procedure documents. Both outline more of a technical kind of activities performed by the IT team in the event of a disaster and the need to recover IT systems and critical IT services. Additionally, there is a formal communications plan set up in conjunction with the Office of Emergency Services in case there is any external or internal communications needed related to any outages or disaster kind of IT services that are unavailable for a period of time. Now, going through the actual findings, our findings broke down into kind of two categories: more of the tactical findings, which are more technical in nature, and then more governance strategic related findings. Tactical findings, as defined here, there are more around the specific configurations that were identified that were recommended for some additional enhancements, as well as some more technical testing of some of those recovery procedures. And during our findings, kind of going through and just evaluating, ensuring that the city's preparedness aligns with best practices. Additionally, the more strategic kind of governance-based findings were related to just some more formalization of activities within the city's documentation, as well as some more of the planning documents or definition of requirements within those documents for the maintenance or recovery of specific IT systems. In total, there were 6 findings from our assessment, all of which that the city has reviewed and management has provided their responses and timelines for remediation. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Nichols. We'll go to public comments first before we bring it back to the committee for questions.
There are no requests to speak.
Very good, thank you. So we'll come back to committee. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for your presentation. Just kind of an overarching question. Always curious about how our auditor sees our city's functions and practices in contrast to that which you see elsewhere. So being somewhat new to this particular topic, my curiosity is how are we faring when you performed this analysis of our disaster preparedness on the tech side? Give us a sense of whether we're in the bronze category, the silver category, the gold category, as a city of our size and scope and purview, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I think one of the key things is the documentation and the governance of the processes that the IT team has in place is there. Majority of the kind of items that we identified were more just enhancements to continue to mature the capabilities of those IT kind of recovery services. But I would say overall, it's a well-structured, formalized function, well-documented with the teams that understand their roles and responsibilities.
Thank you, Councilmember Liftar-Haynes. Councilmember Tanaka?
Can you hear me now? Okay. Yeah, thank you guys for your work on this. Actually, let me try to turn my camera on here. You can see me. Okay. Yeah, thank you for your work here. You hear some like cities or other places where they get hacked and there's ransomware and all that kind of stuff. Have we looked at like how that happened and what steps have been taken to kind of prevent this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so our focus wasn't specifically kind of from a ransomware perspective. It was more the recovery of the overall kind of critical IT services and systems for the city. But with that in mind, I think that was certainly one of those key aspects that is defined within the city's preparedness of the continuity of operations plan, the disaster recovery, as well as the backup procedures, all taken into consideration, focusing on if a security incident like a ransomware attack were to occur, the preparedness and readiness to be able to restore services and systems in a timely manner.
Okay, great. I guess if you're to kind of assess all of the different issues that we have still, what would you say is the biggest risk?
I think there's a heavy focus, of course, on some of those, what are really the most critical IT services to the city, which is really the first place to start for any kind of recovery preparedness. But there's also additional layers to focus on. So I would say there's just the continuing maturity of looking beyond just critical IT services and into the more broader kind of IT applications and capabilities for the city.
Okay, is there something more specific? I guess I was just trying to, I think every organization, there's always issues or things that aren't resolved, maybe because they're lower priority. And I was wondering if you could name specifically some of those.
Yeah, I think one of our findings called out the need to enhance the business impact assessments to be able to identify really what is truly critical to the city operations, as well as the overall recovery objectives for those services. So I think it's kind of ensuring that there's an ongoing review to align the criticality of IT services and the recovery objectives to the overall needs of the city as things evolve and change over time. So I think that would probably be one of the key findings there.
That the city is not evolving. Is that what you're saying?
I think there's again reviews happening, but I think there are more tactical, technical areas that the city can continue to improve and mature on to be able to ensure that there's ongoing alignment between what is critical services or what is deemed critical services and what's currently being serviced by the city.
Okay. Do you have any specifics?
Nothing specific that comes top of mind. I think that was just more of kind of one of the general items that was identified.
Okay. And do you know for the city how much of our technology is like hosted ourselves versus like cloud or hosted by someone else?
I don't have an answer from that one.
Okay.
That might be a question for management to answer.
Council member, thank you for the question. I don't know the answer to that question. We would need to follow up.
Okay. That's all I had. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Tanaka. I had a question about the packet page 14, which is staff report page 10, the criticality. So it notes here that following IT-supported assets have the below designated criticalities. So can you go through some of these with me and help me understand why GIS is one and internet services, network services, email services, file services, VoIP, telephone is 2, and then SAP is 3? How do you figure GIS would be, or how did IT determine GIS was tier 1?
That would be a question for management.
Is that okay? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Nichols. I see, there's tier 1, 2, 3, 4. So GIS has a direct impact on public safety. So is that the police accessing it, emergency services for safety?
GIS is used in conjunction with the deployment of both police and fire resources, but actually more on the fire side as they're looking at the nearest unit.
And so this is accessible in their cars?
They do have, yes, the functionality within their cars.
Okay. The other concern I had was the recovery time objectives, 72 to 120 hours. Is this part of the technicality that can be continued on improvement and maturity?
Yeah, this was, and I think this goes back to one of the areas on the alignment of the criticality and the recovery time to those city services is, I think, an area that can continue to be matured and improved.
And so how far along is the business impact analysis?
That'd be a question for management.
Sure, I can answer that at a high level, council member. And I think, to the extent you have more granular questions, would need to follow back with our IT team. But obviously the IT is working with Office of Emergency Services. And to the point that the auditors already noted, obviously there is a focus on the kind of core city systems at first, and then obviously the ongoing impacts and the broader aspects of individual departmental resources are the next phase, basically. I will say that these audits have come through, just similar to this one, that we have talked about it as a leadership team, and even our IT team held a tabletop exercise for a broader swath of staff recently. And so this is socializing this need. And so even if IT hasn't yet got to a department, we are working through departments to raise their awareness, to have them start working on these continuity plans and identifying their business-specific tools that would impact their day-to-day operations, so that when IT is able to come around with the further work, we can flesh those out.
Thank you.
Mhm.
There was also a comment about backing up the city manages the backups. And I guess the process is not consistently followed. Is that another area for maturity and improvement also?
Yes, yeah, that was noted as another area for ongoing kind of improvement and what we consider kind of hygiene of the processes and such.
Okay, because I read that the SOPs are in place. However, has there been exercises or practices in order to make sure that they do run smoothly and that people do follow and suss out where it works and where it doesn't work? Do you know if that's something that has been done?
It'd be another question for management.
Sure. Thank you again for that question. I think it's always an area of improvement for us. And so as we noted in our management responses, we do maintain the backups for the critical applications, but as we move through the disaster recovery and business continuity project, we do need to ensure that we are formally keeping things, our policies and procedures up to date, as well as the checks and balances to ensure we're meeting all of the check-ins that are outlined in that.
And then so there is a central place where IT operates out of, and in case of emergency, if that place is no longer safe for them to be at, is there somewhere else, or is it done remotely from wherever they are?
Sure, that lends back a little bit more towards the COO, the emergency operations plan, and it really depends on the disaster or the emergency situation in which we're facing. And so to your point, in the advent of post-COVID, a lot of what we can do can be done remotely, but it really does depend on if the staff and the infrastructure can support either remote or if a certain site is down, going to an alternative site. I would need to check in with IT specifically on if we have quote unquote like a second designated place. I don't know that specific, but we do plan for that continuity of operations as part of the EOC training.
That's good to know. On finding number 5, I was just wondering if the auditor is satisfied with the response.
We are, yes.
Very good. That's all my questions, and thank you for the audit. Was this an audit that was passed down from the former auditor? Oh, okay, I see a nod from Assistant City Manager. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any other comments or questions before we close this item? No. All right, very good. So item 1 is closed, and we will move to item number 2, which is
I'm
discussion.
sorry, Chair Koo.
Yes.
If you can take a motion on that first item as a recommendation to council, please. Thank you.
Yes, I will entertain a motion. I think I can start. I'll move to recommend the Policy and Services Committee for council approval of the city auditor's presentation of the Technology Applications Disaster Recovery Preparedness Assessment Audit Report.
Second.
Thank you, ma'am. I don't have anything to speak to it. No. Thank you. Madam Clerk, you can take our votes.
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames,
Yes.
Chair Koo,
Yes.
motion carries.
And with that, we'll close item 1 and move to item 2, which is discussion and recommendation to council on a potential reimbursement policy allowing up to $2,000 annually per council member for specified purposes. Ms. Chantel
Thank you.
Hawkins-Gaines?
Good evening, Chair Koo and members of the Policy and Services Committee. Chantel Cotton Gaines, Deputy City Manager. The item before you today, I will co-present with Attorney Mark Vani and provide some additional information to you. This is one of the referrals that the City Council gave to this committee. I think it's one of the remaining referrals when we were looking at the Procedures and Protocols Handbook in 2023. The question that came from the City Council was, is there a way for the city to dedicate maybe up to $2,000 per council member in some kind of way that would allow the council members to recoup some of the costs that they have just day in the life work as council members. So we had one discussion at this committee already and received some thoughts and questions from the committee. Since that time, the attorney's office led by Mr. Vani has really put together, done a lot of research and also put together a draft policy. And that is what we're bringing forward to you today for your review and feedback on. And if the committee feels that this is matching your intent, you can send this recommendation to the council, or if there are further questions, we can decide where to go with the conversation from there. And if this is approved by the council, it would make a change to your Procedures and Protocols Handbook. So with that, I'll pass it over to Mark.
Good evening, council members. Mark Bonney with the City Attorney's Office. And so as Chantal mentioned, we've put together a draft policy and in the staff memo explained kind of what our thought process is with regard to this policy if it moves forward. With that, we're available to answer any questions, logistical questions, whatnot. This is still very much an idea and would need to be, the staff would need to develop forms, protocols, things like that. And I will mention too, I think at the last Policy and Services Committee, there was discussion of a stipend, and as we explained in the memo, a pure stipend is something that we can't do under our own charter because it's considered taxable income and thus would be salary, and your salary is capped per state law. But this process, a partial reimbursement for use of cell phone and other technological devices for official use, if they're substantiated with receipts, we felt was within the letter of the law and spirit of the law. And the receipts, just to allay any concerns, they don't need to be that detailed. In a cell phone, for example, cell phone bill, we don't need the entire bill, something that just demonstrates that the cell phone was used and paid for with personal funds and the amount, and that should be sufficient for our purposes. But with that, I'll open the floor to any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Vani. Before we open it for questions, shall we go to public comments?
There are no requests to speak.
Very good, thank you. Back to committee. Councilmember Liz-Haynes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mark, Mr. Vani, for your presentation. Much appreciated, and really appreciate how you've attempted to solve the problem embedded in the spirit of the concern at the outset, where stipends are problematic because they become taxable income. There's a way for people to be less out of pocket for council service by reimbursing for certain things. So I appreciate the creativity. I'm curious as to how the 25% reimbursement idea came about, where that figure came from. I understand that if it's 100% city use, it's 100% reimbursed, but there are some devices, I own lots of them, that are personal and city use. I don't have a separate set. So I like the fact that we've figured out a way for our personal devices to be partially, the expenses partially reimbursed. But how did you come up with 25%?
Well, I think we had some discussions about what we felt was a reasonable estimation of the amount of time that a council member might use their device for official business. Of course, you all have better experience with that, and that number can change. It really was a line that we drew based on our reasonable assumptions. But as I mentioned in the memo, if council members feel that, actually a third of our time is used, then, we can do 33% or something like that. But yeah, 100% won't work unless the device or item would be used 100% for official business. And then we have a protocol in the policy that we're developing that the council member would need to return the item to the city, since it would be city property unless the city manager determined that the item had no value or use. But yes, getting to that 25%, it was a number that we determined was reasonable, but it can certainly change if the Policy and Services Committee and the council feels otherwise.
It strikes me as probably fitting for my cell phone bill, but not for my Zoom account, because almost the entirety of my Zoom activity is related to city work. So again, we're just curious. I know there's no perfect number, and we don't want a Byzantine difficult system of checking this and that. Every time you submit something, you have to prove the percentage. So I like that we're trying to come up with a number that feels fair and is ethical with regard to the expenditure of the city's funds. My second question is, it looks like the cell phone bill is going to have a cap to be established by the council, if I'm understanding this correctly, 25% of the actual total monthly cost of their use of their cell phone, up to a dollar amount established by the council. This appears to be the only device or service where you're indicating the total dollar amount available for reimbursement at that 25% will be capped. Why is that the case?
Well, I want to draw your attention to section 2.1 in the third paragraph. That cap is also referenced there. So it would apply to technological purchases as well.
Okay, sorry, I missed that. Thank you.
No, that's fine. And that cap is the 2,000. My understanding of the initial recommendation or proposal was that, it would be capped at $2,000. So, that's what would be available. And
I understand. So it's the cap of 2,000, assuming 2,000 is the amount we agreed to. That's the cap that's being referred to. I thought this was a subcap underneath. So we might reimburse you 2,000 in a year, but only some portion less than that is the cap up to which we'll reimburse your cell phone expenses. So I misunderstood that.
Yeah, and that cap again, $2,000 is what was proposed, but that number could change in the future if the council so desires.
That clears up my misunderstanding. Thank you very much. That's it for me.
Thank you, Councilmember Scott Hames. Councilmember Tanaka?
Yeah, I just want to echo the sentiment of my colleague. I think she's spot on all the things she just said. I've been at it for a while, and I can tell you definitely exceed $2,000 annually. There's no question about it. I mean, my Zoom account, cell phone, website, through editing software, Google Docs, goes on and on and on. Does not even close. So, I found the staff report to be very, very prescriptive. And if we're talking about like, 20,000 or 200,000 or 2 million, my God, of course we want to do all of that, but we're talking about 2,000. And the staff time just to administrate such a small amount of money and to be so pedantic about it strikes me as we'll spend more money than $2,000 trying to manage it. So my suggestion here is we keep it really easy. This is not a big dollar figure, and staff's time is also very valuable. And I wouldn't be surprised if we have this kind of level of detail that it will incur a cost on both sides for the council member who has already very limited time, and also for staff, which is not cheap at all. So I would be in favor of something much more lightweight, because I don't think we have to worry about unless the council members going to just hide out in a cave all day and never talk to anyone. I can't see them not spending this amount annually. So I'm in favor of just going much more lighter weight, a lot more easy on this.
Just as a bit of information as well, and I believe Mark mentioned some of this, the balance that we tried to strike with the policy draft brought to you today is trying to keep in mind that the more cumbersome it is, the less likely it will be of use to you as council members, but also following our accounting and other sets of principles that we have to make sure that we're also doing this in a way that ensures the accountability that we expect for any use of city funds. So we tried to strike a balance between the two. If there are suggestions on other ways that maybe we can make this a little bit easier from your opinion, we'd love to hear that feedback. And we also have staff here from our administrative services department who can explain sort of why we wanted to offer some of those procedural things just to make sure that we had good accounting for anything filed at the city.
Thank you for the clarification. So I'm trying to understand how would you see the process, which department? Is it going to go to ASD or is it going to go to the city clerk's office? And then I know that there's a document that you're supposed to fill out. I forget what its name is. But
I can take the first part and then I will let Ms. Paras speak to the second part. Because the city council interfaces with the city clerk for a lot of your regular things you need, so your travel and other things, the way that we're recommending the start of that process is you would do the same thing, working with the city clerk's office. Once they have the comprehensive information that they need, they would submit that to the administrative services department is the way that we've thought it through so far. And with that, I'll give it to Christine to describe a little bit more about within ASD.
Hi, good evening. Christine Paras, Assistant Director of Administrative Services. Chantal's right on. We're working with Mahia and her team to develop a process that is smooth and easy, not invasive. It may involve like asking council members to certify use. Say, for instance, if you had a cell phone that had both business and personal use, and certifying, okay, this is a shared line. The total is this and 25% is this, and sign that off, submit it to council, the city clerk's office, and we process reimbursement in ASD.
sounds simple,
Yeah,
right?
I'm trying to make it simple. This will be almost a monthly thing, so we want to make it as easy as possible.
I will say that, I remember when I first started, we had to do our travels ourselves and then submit all the receipts. It was, sometimes I just forget it, because it's like it's so much trouble. But now Mahia and her team have just made it so smooth, because they take care of pre-authorization ahead of time, This is going to be coming in after. So yeah, thank you, Ms. Paras. And so the reimbursements, it mostly in the policy, the draft policy, it talks about communication tools. So it has to do with mostly communication equipment, plans and all that. It doesn't extend out to number of paper used or, right. I mean, I think keeping it to communication tools is good. Just trying to make sure that that's quite understood.
Yes, and I'll look to Mark to add anything to this, but during the last conversation with the committee, Attorney Molly Stump made it clear that it's really tricky if we allow for events or any other type of activities. So communications was something very tangible that we knew that there would be a way that the council members could provide some sort of substantiation for the thing that you are requesting the fund reimbursement for. Mark, you can add on to that if there's anything.
Yeah, that's correct. My direction, as I understood it, was to put something together that would relate to cell phone usage, technology purchases, and we tried to provide some examples, computers, tablets, software, so on, things like that. But yes, if we were dealing with things like events or other types of, that would be a much more robust policy, and there would need to be a number of additional parameters in that policy.
In the memo, in the draft policy, it says data plans. So are those the phone, mobile data plans or, okay.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for putting all of this together, giving it the consideration. Councilmember Lithcott-Hames.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I know that one of the examples given at our prior meeting of how some of us may be expending funds on behalf of the city or in furtherance of our work as council members, the subject of interns came up. And my narrow question here is, I know the city does have intern programs. I had the pleasure of speaking with some interns this summer. Are those interns paid?
Thank you, Councilmember, for the question. Those interns are paid for the most part, although some are obviously on a volunteer or perhaps school credit basis. Those interns do go through a formal recruitment process with our HR team. They do go through a formal hiring process, just like any staff member would, including backgrounding. And so as part of that, then they are brought on as a limited term out annually.
And as a routine matter, are we drawing from the Palo Alto area only or the broader region, or might they come from anywhere?
The recruitment is not restricted by any geography. And so ultimately the screening process happens based on the needs of the internship specifically.
I'm trying to get at, for those of us who want to work with additional humans to get the work done and want to see those humans compensated fairly. If the city already has a mechanism in place, I'm wondering if I, as a council member, could say, hey, I'm interested in being in that pool or in having access to that pool of potential hirees where the city would vet them and hire them, but they'd be farmed out to, work with me or with Councilmember Tanaka.
Sure. I know that the committee has explored the idea of interns and paid help, assistance in these roles. And I do think that is a much broader question outside of this policy. There are a number of regulations that come with employment. And so I think we would need to have a much deeper discussion on what that looks like. Everything from workplace safety, training, liability, workers' comp, et cetera. And so I think that's a much meatier topic.
Yep, I appreciate that. My other question here, technical, sorry, I didn't have all my ducks in a row at the outset, Chair. Expenses are to be reimbursed, we're suggesting within 60 days of the incurred expense. There are some expenses that are annual, like my Zoom, I think is an annual. I pay it and I just got charged a few days ago, $586.50 for my Zoom. I hope that's an annual expense. I think it is. I'm pretty sure it is. So it is not that you have to sort of, with a cell bill, you sort of see your date, you see what you spent and you get reimbursed for it. Here, you're paying in advance for a year. I presume that's okay. That still fits under this. And I believe it says it will not roll over year. Would we contemplate the fiscal year of the city being the year we're talking about, or the calendar year?
Yes, so just so you have a verbal confirmation on the first part, whenever you have your annual Zoom bill come in, you can submit it at that time. So we were all nodding, but I thought I'd say that out loud for you. And then to the question of the year, because this money is taken out of council contingency, so imagine your bucket of contingency money, this is subtracting $14,000 out of that, if I did the proper math. So that is on the fiscal year cycle. And at the end of each fiscal year, the council contingency unspent funds are not carried over to the next year. So this is just fitting within that normal process with that existing bucket of money.
Thank you. And if I may, my last question, Chair, sorry, for Councilmember Tanaka, I just was curious as to whether you're proposing a simpler process. We've got a proposal here. We've heard what the planned sort of process would be in the city clerk's office. Sounds pretty simple, and yet you have in mind something simpler. Since we're PNS and we may ultimately be recommending this to council, I'm just wondering if you have the ability tonight to articulate what you see as the simpler process. Because it may be that we want to put forward options to the council, or it may be that we only want to put forth one option. It really comes down to, can you identify with enough specificity the simpler plan?
Sure, yeah, thank you for asking. Well, first of all, let me just comment on something you said earlier, which I thought it was great, is, a lot of other cities have staff for council members. We don't. We kind of take it all on ourselves. So I support the idea of also, maybe grabbing for pool of interns or whatever, but I think it would be great for people to get paid for their work. So I support that thought. In terms of making this easier, I just see all these kind of limitations from you got to get within 30 days and, like all these deadlines and like we're not talking about a lot of money here. That's the thing about it. And so I just wonder, like, does it need to be so stringent, right? I don't, I'm gonna be termed out soon, so I'm not, it's not gonna benefit me. So I'm talking for future people, right? That will be sitting here, and it's reduced the amount of bureaucracy. I mean, I think I would keep it very easy for people. I would, if someone misses it by a day, misses it, by a week, what's the big deal? So I would just try to be flexible here because this is a nominal amount of money. I think most council members are going to spend way more than this anyways. Because I also had a similar Zoom bill, right? And I also have like Gmail accounts and other stuff that I have to pay for, right? Through editing software. So it just goes on and on and on. And this is not even close to a council member's expenses. So yeah, so I just think there's a lot more flexibility that's needed. It just seems like so many things in here where, council members, wasn't able to get their extension put in, they're out of pocket, right? It just doesn't seem right or fair. So I just think that really what should we look at is $2,000 limit. Okay, that's it. And but all the other kind of nitty gritty stuff like this 25%, which is like, okay, I do like the idea of just having something simple like, hey, sign affirming that this is used for council member expenses, right? Something like that. Or city expenses. I think that makes sense. Because if you're going to ask them to justify it, you're going to go to the house and make sure they actually did that, right? It gets to be ridiculous for this amount of money. So because it's going to cost way more than that just for staff time to enforce it. So I think we just got to be within reason here, right? To make it simple and easy for people, and it could be well assured that council members are going to waste or spend more money on their expenses than they're going to get reimbursed per year. Excuse me?
Something to say?
No.
No, okay. All right, so I would like to hear, so for example, when staff is working with council members, you're working for for the whole, right? So I kind of want to understand, how would an intern who's paid by the city through taxpayer money, how would they be assigned to work for a singular council member? And under what guidelines that would serve the interest of this whole council versus just one particular council member?
Great question. I think that we haven't thought that through yet. That's not part of the policy in front of you this evening. That it's a great question of within the city's existing internship program, is there any ideas around how maybe that an intern could help additionally in some kind of way with the council? We have not had that question before, so we do want to go back and think about it a little bit as we are coming off of this year's internship program and thinking about next year. So we appreciate that question and can process it a little more. The reason we did not include any funding out of this $2,000 for interns with this program is because we had that feedback from our HR and our attorney's office of We would want to make sure if we were funding a person through these funds that we are following all of our requirements as an employer. And it gets a little gray in our ability to supervise and ensure safe work environments, et cetera. So for the policy in front of you today, it doesn't contemplate paying for people at all, just technology.
Thank you. And I would think also, when they're applying for the internship, they're also looking to expand their understanding of how government works, the different departments, so they have much more exposure to the government work, the different departments and so forth. So I guess that would be a totally different job description to say, well, you're assigned to one council member, and I don't know what work they would do. And yeah, so I think those are some things to be explored. I think with the youth coming in, it's better to expose them to as much things as possible so that they can see where they're going to land. But that's for further exploration if that comes up. Okay, anything else? Ma'am, yes, please go ahead. Oh, yeah. Ready for a
Well,
motion.
I'd like to move that the Policy and Services Committee recommend that council include the draft reimbursement policy in the City Council Procedures and Protocols Handbook.
I'll second it.
Motion made by Councilmember Lithcott-Hames, second by Councilmember Tanaka. Would you like to speak?
I just want to speak to Councilmember Tanaka. I appreciated your interest in a more simplified process. And I think rather than encumber the motion with, or ask for the draft to be revised to include, a lesser detailed process, you are of course free to, and I know you will, raise this in our council conversation so that other council members who might agree that, hey, maybe this could be actually less cumbersome, will have the opportunity to have that conversation with you, taking a lead on that.
Would you like to speak to your second? No, thank you. I will not be supporting this. I feel as a council member, we elected to do this position, and I don't know if everybody kind of was aware that they were coming into this and decided to take it freely. So I won't be supporting it, but thank you for the motion and for the suggestions. Madam Clerk, will you take the vote?
Councilmember Tanaka,
Yes.
Councilmember Lithcott-Hames,
Yes.
Chair Ku.
No.
Motion carries.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I might, given that this item relates to your Procedures and Protocols Handbook, which we love talking about at the full council, if it is okay with this committee, is it all right if I bring this discussion as part of the next time that we talk about your Procedures and Protocols Handbook at council? So it may not be immediately, if that's okay with you, but if that's all right with this committee, I can do that. It may be December,
It kind of depends on how long,
the timing.
because for those who are concerned with the extreme cost relative
True.
to one's personal income of serving on council, this is actually going to offer some financial relief. And so I would hate to see us having talked about it in 2024, but it doesn't come forth till 2025 and isn't in the handbook. I would hate to see it take years to implement something this relatively simple. So when do you think it is going to come back?
I will take that into consideration and see when that next schedule is. And if it's too far out, then I can just put this as a separate item. Thank you for that feedback. Good guidance for me.
Ms. Gaines, would you like to, well, in that case, we're going to close item 2, and we have future meetings and agenda. Will you give us an update?
Yes, I actually don't have the exact list for the month of October. So I will share that with the chair, but there are a lot of items coming between now and the end of the year, between October, November, and December. So I will be sure to share that tentative list with the committee once I see a few items that are moving around that have landed, but I know for sure there'll be at least a couple of audits in October. And lastly, the November meeting, we are looking to move that meeting to have a special city council meeting to replace the Veterans Day City Council meeting. So the clerk's office will be reaching out to the committee members to find a replacement date for November, as I anticipate we will still need a November meeting.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if there's nothing else, our meeting is adjourned. Thank you.